I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life, and every single time the room goes quiet at the same exact spot. People lean in, they stop chewing, and I get it because I was there and I still don't fully believe what I saw with my own 2 eyes that morning at Fort Brennan. So let me tell it the way it actually happened, not the version that got passed around the barracks until it grew a tail and wings, the real one. It was late August and the desert out past the fence line was the color of old bone. We were 11 days into basic, and that's a strange stretch of time, long enough that you've stopped crying for home but short enough that you still flinch at everything. Most of us were 19, 20. Loud in the way scared kids get loud, all elbows and bravado trying to convince each other we belonged. The mess hall at Brennan was this long low building with fans that pushed the hot air around instead of cooling it. The whole place smelled like powdered eggs and bleach and the faint sweetness of the syrup they kept in those steel dispensers. Trays clattered, boots scraped. Somebody was always laughing too hard at something that wasn't funny. That was the soundtrack. I can still hear it if I close my eyes. She came into our company 3 days late. That was the first thing anyone noticed about her. While the rest of us had been shaved down and screamed at and run into the dirt together since day one, she just showed up on the morning of the 4th day with a duffel and a flat, unbothered look on her face, like she'd misplaced a bus ticket and finally found it. Her name was Renata Soto. Most people just called her Soda, the way we all got called by our last names. She was small. I want to be honest about that because it matters to the story. Maybe 5'4" lean with hands that didn't look like they could open a jar of pickles. She had this quiet about her that some of the guys read as weakness right away. You know the type of guy I mean. The kind who measures a room the second he walks in to figure out who he can stand on. That guy in our company was Cody Marsh. Marsh was big, played some college ball before he washed out, and he never let you forget either part. He had a voice that filled a room whether you wanted it to or not, and a way of making fun of you that felt friendly right up until it didn't. He'd already made 2 recruits cry by the end of week 1. One of them was a soft-spoken kid from Tennessee named Prout who just wanted to send money home to his mom. Marsh found out and wrote him about it for days. Mama's boy needs his allowance. That kind of thing, relentless. So when Soto walked into the mess that first morning, tray in hand, scanning for a seat, you could feel the room recalibrate. New person, small, quiet, female in a company that was mostly young men with something to prove. Marsh smelled it like a shark smells a drop of blood. I was sitting 2 tables over with Prout and a guy named Okonkwo, and I remember Okonkwo muttering, "Here we go," under his breath before anything even happened. He had good instincts, Okonkwo. He saw it coming. Marsh said it loud enough for the whole corner to hear. "Hey, you sure you're in the right building? Day cares back the way you came." A few guys laughed, not because it was clever, because Marsh was the kind of person you laughed along with so the spotlight wouldn't swing to you. I'm not proud to say I'd done it myself once or twice that week. There's a cowardice that lives in big rooms full of frightened people, and I had a share of it. Sode didn't even look up. She set her tray down at the end of an empty table, sat and started eating, calm, methodical. She cut her eggs into squares. I noticed that. She ate like she had somewhere to be, and this was just fuel. That non-reaction bothered Marsh more than any comeback would have. I've thought about that a lot since. Bullies don't actually want you to fight back, they want you to flinch. They want the little flicker of fear that tells them they're real and important. Soto gave him nothing, and nothing is the one thing a guy like that can't stand. He didn't drop it. Over the next few days he kept poking. He'd accidentally bump her tray. He'd narrate her like a nature documentary in this dumb whisper voice. He started calling her G.I. Jane like he'd invented the joke. She never took the bait. She'd do the work, hit her marks on the runs, qualify on the range, and disappear into herself the rest of the time. She had this stillness. The kind you don't usually see in a kid that age, the kind that, looking back, should have told us all something. There was one moment, maybe day 7 or 8, that I keep coming back to. We were doing rope work and Prout froze near the top, just locked up, too scared to go up and too scared to come down. The kid was shaking. Drill Sergeant Vey was screaming the way they do. And it was Soto 3 positions over who started talking to Prout, low, steady. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the effect. Prout's breathing slowed, his hands unclenched. He came down safe. She didn't make a thing of it after. Just nodded at him once and went back to her business. Prout told me later what she'd said. It wasn't anything fancy. She just kept telling him, one hand, now the other, "You're already doing it," over and over, like she'd talked scared people down before, like it was a thing she knew how to do. I filed that away without understanding it. I think most of us did. We saw her as the quiet new girl Marsh liked to torment, and we didn't look any closer than that. We were teenagers. We weren't looking closely at anything except ourselves. The weather that whole week was brutal. heat that sat on your chest, the kind where the horizon shimmers and your sweat dries before it even finishes rolling. The fans in the mess just moved it around. By the time the morning I'm telling you about came around, tempers across the whole company were sanded down to nothing. Everyone was raw, everyone was tired. And Marsh, for whatever reason, maybe a bad night, maybe a letter from home, who knows what's underneath guys like that, Marsh woke up looking for somewhere to put it. He found Soto. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because we'd had a brutal land nav exercise the day before and half the company was nursing blisters and the other half was nursing pride. Breakfast was the one warm spot in the day, 20 minutes where nobody was yelling at you and we all clung to it. Soto was at her usual end of the table. Alone but not lonely alone, comfortable alone. She had her tray squared up in front of her and she was eating in that same quiet, deliberate way. Marsh sat down across from her uninvited with two of his guys flanking him and you could feel the whole corner of the room get tight. It's a thing you learn to sense, that pressure change before something bad, like the air before a storm. He started in on her about the land nav, said she'd slowed her team down, which wasn't even true. I'd heard the cadre say her group came in second, but Marsh wasn't interested in true. He was interested in a reaction. He leaned across the table into her space and kept escalating, getting louder, calling her names that I won't repeat, the kind that are about putting a woman in a box more than anything else. Soto kept eating. And that's when he reached over and knocked her tray off the table. It hit the floor with this huge clatter, eggs everywhere. Her cup of juice rolled under the next table. The whole mess hall went quiet, that fast, total quiet where even the kitchen guys stopped, 40 kids holding their breath. Soto looked at the mess on the floor, then she looked at him, still calm, and she said, I heard this clear as anything, she said, you're going to want to clean that up. Not a threat, not loud, just a plain fact, the way you'd tell someone their shoes untied. That broke something loose in Marsh. Maybe it was the calm, maybe it was that she'd told him what to do in front of his guys. He stood up so fast his bench scraped back and tipped, and he came around the table at her with his arm cocked back. Big guy, 220 pounds of angry kid, he swung. I want to describe what happened next as carefully as I can because it happened in about a second and a half, and I've spent years putting it back together frame by frame in my head. She was already moving before his fist got anywhere near her, not away toward him and off to the side into the swing. She came up off that bench in one motion, smooth, like she'd been sitting there coiled the whole time just waiting. His punch went over her shoulder into empty air. Her hand was on his wrist before he even finished missing. She turned, used his own weight and momentum, and the next thing any of us saw, Cody Marsh, the biggest, loudest guy in the company, was face down on the mess hall floor with his arm bent up behind his back at an angle arms aren't supposed to bend, and her knee was pinning him at the shoulder. She hadn't hit him, that's the part that gets me still. She never threw a single strike. She just redirected everything he gave her and put him on the ground, controlled, the way you'd handle a door that swings too hard. He was thrashing and yelling and she just held him there with what looked like almost no effort, her face completely flat like she was waiting for a bus. The room did not make a sound. Prute's mouth was hanging open. Okonkwo had a fork halfway to his mouth, frozen. I think I forgot to breathe. She leaned down close to Marsh's ear and said something to him, real quiet, just for him. I didn't hear it then. He went still when she said it. All the fight just drained out of him. And then she let go, stood up, stepped back, and gave him room to get up on his own with whatever dignity he had left. That's when Drill Sergeant Vay came through the doors, because of course someone had run for the cadre the second the tray hit the floor. Vay took one look at Marsh on the floor and Soto standing over him calm as a Sunday, and you could see him doing the math, trying to figure out how the biggest recruit in his company ended up down there. What happened, Vay said, not really a question. And here's the thing that told me the most about Renata Soto. She didn't sell Marsh out, she could have. She had 40 witnesses and the moral high ground and a guy who'd been tormenting her for a week. Instead she said, flat, misunderstanding, Drill Sergeant, we're squared away. Vay looked at Marsh. Marsh, to his credit, or maybe just because he had no other move, nodded and said, squared away, Drill Sergeant. His voice was about half its usual size. Vay didn't buy it for a second, you could tell, but he also clearly understood that something had shifted in that room that he couldn't fully see, and that whatever it was, it had resolved itself. He told the room to clean up and get to formation, and he pulled Soto aside on the way out. I was close enough to catch the tail end of it. Vey said something low and I only caught Soto's answer. She said, long time ago, drill sergeant, different chapter. And Vey, this man who screamed at us all day, who we thought was made of granite. Vey straightened up just slightly, gave her a short nod, the kind of nod one professional gives another, and he let her go. Marsh cleaned up the eggs himself. Nobody told him to, he just did it on his knees with everyone pretending not to watch. We were all desperate to know what was going on. By lunch the whispers were everywhere. Half of them were nonsense. She was secretly an officer, she'd killed a man, she was an instructor planted to test us. The barracks rumor machine ran hot for 2 solid days, but the people who'd actually been in the mess that morning, the ones who'd seen it, we knew it wasn't a story. We'd watched a small, quiet girl take the most physically intimidating person any of us knew and fold him up like a lawn chair without throwing a punch. You don't learn that in 11 days of basic. You don't learn it in a year. That came from somewhere. I didn't get the somewhere until later. And when I did, it changed how I thought about a lot of things, about who's strong, about what quiet means, about how badly you can misjudge a person just by looking at the outside of them. It was Prout who actually got the story out of her, which figures, because Prout was the one person in that company she seemed to have any softness for. It happened a week or so later. We were on a firewatch rotation, the 2 in the morning kind where you're so tired the world gets a little dreamlike. Prout and Soto pulled it together and I had the next shift, so I was sitting nearby half awake and I heard most of it. I've never told most people this part, it always felt like it wasn't fully mine to share. But it's been a lot of years now and I think it deserves to be told right. Prout asked her straight out, where'd you learn to do that, the thing in the mess hall? She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said her brother taught her the start of it. He was older. He'd gone into the Navy out of high school, made it through the hardest training they had, the kind where most people quit. He came home between deployments, different, harder in some ways, gentler in others, and he started teaching her. Not because she'd ever need it, he said, because he wanted her to never be the kind of scared he'd seen in people. He'd drill her in the garage, footwork, how to fall, how to use someone's own size against them, how to stay calm when your whole body is screaming to panic. Panic is just a decision you keep making, she said he used to tell her. Stop deciding it. She said they did it for years, most weekends it was their thing. And then one deployment her brother didn't come home from. She didn't say how. She didn't have to. She just said the training was the last thing she had that was really his, and she kept doing it, kept finding people to learn more from, because as long as she was doing it, some part of him was still in the room with her. She'd enlisted, she said, partly to understand the world he'd lived in, to stand where he'd stood. She'd come into our company late because of a paperwork mess transferring from another program, and she hadn't told anyone any of this because she didn't want it to be the first thing people knew about her. The second people find out you can fight, she said, it's the only thing they see. I wanted to just be a person for a while. Prout asked her what she'd whispered to Marsh on the floor, the thing that made him go still. She was quiet again, then she said she'd told him, I know you're not actually like this, I've watched you, you're better than this, don't make me the reason you find out the hard way. And then she'd let him up. I think about that more than anything else from that whole summer. She had him beaten. She had every right to humiliate him, to make an example, to take everything back that he'd taken from people all week. And instead, in the one moment she had